There's nothing like HIV. There's no disease, no infectious disease that essentially kills everyone who gets it.
The fear factor's gone, and yet getting HIV infection is a problem for any individual. The fear should still remain because it's a virus that kills people.
There is this sense of complacency that it's better, and it isn't better. And all these people, these 40+ million people living with the virus today will die of AIDS.
Over the past 3 decades, humanity has rallied together for the AIDS cause. People from all walks of life have united across all social and economic boundaries, joining hand in hand for one common purpose: to end AIDS.
And I want you to say the name of the person you're walking for. I'm walking for Robert Johnson. I'm walking for Rock Hudson. I'm walking for everybody that isn't here to walk for themselves.
The statistics are growing, all except for one. That's the amount of people cured, and it's still 0.
In theory, we could cure AIDS on a piece of paper. Maybe someday it'll come. I can't say when.
Despite all the major progress we have in chemotherapy of those patients, none of these patients got rid of the virus.
I don't think the pharmaceutical industry is very interested or invested in a cure. You know, I don't mean to be too cynical, but the reality, I think, is that, you know, the situation they've got now, which is lifetime treatment with expensive drugs, that kind of suits them pretty well.
A cure is going to require some very tricky and sophisticated molecular biology, and I frankly don't see it happening.
Ever?
Ever.
I was born in 1980, a year before AIDS exploded onto the public consciousness. I grew up beneath its shadow like a child raised under the threat of the mushroom cloud. You might say I am a member of the first HIV/AIDS generation. I've never known a world without it. This film is an account of my journey through the shifting sand surrounding HIV/AIDS. AIDS has been front-page news for nearly 30 years. Yet how much do any of us really know about HIV and AIDS? What is the difference between HIV and AIDS?
I don't know exactly.
HIV is wow.
HIV 是它的病毒，那 AIDS 是那个病，所以两种是完全不一样的东西。
AIDS is the actual disease. I don't know really. I don't know the difference.
I know HIV is less deadly.
Pour moi, il y en a pas forcément. Enfin, c'est vrai que j'établis pas de différence entre les deux.
What would you say is the difference between HIV and AIDS?
There is not a big difference, is it?
HIV/AIDS is just the starting point.
HIV is a virus.
The actual virus is AIDS.
People around the globe were just as confused as I was. So I sought out the world's leading HIV/AIDS authorities, among whom were the discoverers of HIV, the key White House advisor on AIDS issues, and the executive director of UNAIDS' global response to the epidemic. Meeting with these distinguished experts, I candidly asked, what is the difference between HIV and AIDS?
The difference between HIV and AIDS is a really critical concept, and unfortunately it's one that seems to escape a lot of people, or just they don't remember it after hearing it.
HIV is a virus. AIDS is a syndrome caused by infection with the virus. So you don't get infected with AIDS, you get infected with HIV, and that causes AIDS.
The biggest problem with the HIV theory of AIDS is HIV.
There is a group of AIDS denialists that say that HIV does not exist and has never been isolated, which is as bizarre as it gets.
We do not say that HIV doesn't exist. What we say is that the presently available data does not prove the existence of HIV.
The reality is that HIV does exist and does cause AIDS.
I mean, the evidence is incontrovertible. HIV causes AIDS.
All right, that's a theory that's there. Let that theory be there. But let's have some other conversations. Let's have some other research. Let's have some other funding. Maybe something else is working here. No.
Why nearly 3 decades since its discovery does there continue to be debate over HIV? Why is there no cure in sight? To answer these questions, I needed context. The past is prologue, so my journey begins with a step back in time.
The National Center for Disease Control is reporting more cases of 2 rare and deadly diseases found in homosexual men. There is no apparent explanation for the outbreak.
Obviously, this is an issue with great emotional fervor, but...
How can we stay unemotional when people are dying every day from a disease the CDC has yet to name? For crying out loud, if the CDC won't name it, at least demand the press stop calling it GRID.
Well, unfortunately, I have to take credit for coining the term GRID, which stood for gay-related immune deficiency. We were seeing a cluster of gay men who were suddenly critically ill of pneumocystis pneumonia, which was the indicator disease of something new, and reported our findings to the CDC.
I was the chief of the STD division at the CDC at that time, when the draft report of 5 cases of pneumocystis in gay men came across my desk for review. Shortly afterward, cases of a very rare cancer called Kaposi sarcoma were diagnosed in young gay men. My first reaction was, this is an extraordinarily important finding.
The CDC was looking for something like that when it came along. They were looking for it already. They were hoping there was going to be a new plague because polio was over. The CDC's budget was getting decreased. This is back in like the early 80s.
There was double-digit inflation, a very high unemployment, a rapid military buildup, and a threat to decrease all domestic programs. And this led to reductions in force in the public health service, particularly the CDC.
The Center of Disease Control, CDC, in Atlanta was under threat for reduction and even theoretically for closure.
There were memos around the CDC that says we need to find a new plague.
For them to justify their expenses and their existence and make their careers, they have to find infectious diseases.
We need to find something that'll scare the American people so they won't give us more money.
Once people recognized that this was likely caused by a virus, the media attention went from no news coverage to the most covered news story in history. People went from neglecting it to fear and panic. Maybe I can get it.
All of a sudden, AIDS was a very fundable project, and I suppose the psychology they worked on was the fact that they thought, well, in Congress, essentially this is white, straight, heterosexual men who are the congressmen, and if they feel they can't fuck around without being worried about AIDS, they're going to let the dollars out. And it worked.
Suddenly there was a lot of money available for anybody who wanted to study HIV. And nobody ever looked back and said, why do we want to study HIV? Bob Gallo said on television, causes AIDS.
The evidence shows that this disease is not merely confined to the gay community. I motion to call the disease Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, AIDS.